Starting us off at our number 10 spot, we have snake oil. Ew. Nowadays, the name snake oil salesman refers to someone who is knowingly selling fraudulent goods, but this title actually gets its roots from an actual occupation from back in the 1800s. Oil was extracted from Chinese water snakes, and due to this oil being rich in omega-3s, it was used to reduce inflammation, treat arthritis, and even bursitis. These oils were rubbed on workers' joints after a long and hard day of work, mostly workers who were working on the Transcontinental Railroad. But then came Clark Stanley, the rattlesnake king. Stanley claimed he studied with a Hopi medicine man who convinced Stanley of the incredible snake oil healing powers. He then took this newfound knowledge on the road and performed at Chicago's World Fair in 1893. His act consisted of him taking a rattlesnake out of a bag, cutting it open, and extracting the liquid and claiming it to be the medicinal snake oil. But the FDA later confirmed that there was no trace of real snake oil in his liquid at all. But that didn't stop dishonest doctors and other fraudulent salesmen from attempting to sell the fake snake oil. This then gave this somewhat true and beneficial medical practice a bad name. Folks, if any of you need any supplements for joints or otherwise, use any of the trusted omega-3 oils being sold around the world today. There's also tons of natural foods that will give you a great dose of that stuff too, so no need to go snake hunting. Coming in at our number 9 spot, we have doctors using blow. That's right, we all know the drug that is often referred to as blow. Well, back in the day, doctors actually prescribed it to patients who were experiencing toothaches, depression, sinusitis, lethargy, alcoholism, and even impotence. In the mid-1880s, scientists were able to isolate the active ingredient in the coca leaf, known as erythrocin coca. Guess what? Pharmaceutical companies loved it. So what happened? Well, it was soon being sold as a lozenge, a tonic, a powder, and even in cigarettes. It even appeared in Sears catalogs. Yeah, remember those things? I mean, I remember the Christmas ones because I would always pick my yearly new toy out of that magazine, but luckily I never even picked or even came across blow being sold, so I think my parents were thankful for that. But anyway, they were advertised in little boxes with tablets inside, and buyers could purchase them for about 50 cents a box. You didn't even need a prescription from a doctor for it. Fortunately, and I guess unfortunately for others, in 1914, the Harrison Narcotic Act outlawed the production, importation, and distribution of the substance. Other fun fact that many of you might already know, but the same substance was also found in the famous Coca-Cola drink, another reason for why the soft drink was named Coca-Cola. Coming in at number 8 and staying on the illegal substance train, we have dope. How did people in the past help cure one drug epidemic? Well, they made a new one. This is what happened in the late 1880s when the popular drug we all call dope was used as a substitute instead of morphine. It was known as diamorphine, and the English chemical researcher named C.R. Adler Wright created it in the late 1870s. But it wasn't until a chemist working for the Bayer Company, which is still around to this day, discovered Wright's paper in 1895 and that the drug actually came to market. Bayer claimed it to be 5 times more effective and less addictive than morphine. So Bayer began marketing dope-laced aspirin in 1898 that was suggested for people suffering from sore throats, coughs, and colds. Bayer continued to rep and also highly tout the product until they noticed users coming back for bottles more and more. Finally, in 1913, Bayer finally stopped production of the drug after it was banned by the FDA altogether. Yeah, I think that was a good call, but I couldn't imagine what the withdrawal problem many people probably went through. I can't imagine what it was like. I mean, I know that is one hard drug that is insanely tough to quit, and going cold turkey on anything is so freaking difficult, let alone going cold turkey from a hard drug. That being said, I'm glad we don't actively prescribe it anymore. That I know of. Coming in at our number 7 spot, we have mercury treatment. Today, mercury is popularly known as a potentially poisonous metal that causes extremely harmful effects if exposed in large amounts for a prolonged amount of time. However, this wasn't always the belief. Once upon a time, let's say as far back as the early 20th century, mercury was actually used as a diuretic, disinfectant, and even a laxative. I think we should just stick to our prune juice here, but anyway. It was even used as a treatment for syphilis in some cases. But what's really scary is that doctors back then often mistook mercury poisoning symptoms for syphilis symptoms themselves. So what would they do? They would give them more mercury while they were already mercury poisoned. Freaking yikes, guys. It was even used as a dewormer in some cases in people of all ages, young and old. However, merbromin, which is a mercury-containing topical antiseptic, is still used to this day to treat minor cuts and scratches and is used widely among many countries. That being said, it is banned in the US for probably obvious reasons. Coming in at number 6 is one that, if you ask me, is quite misogynistic and sexist, but anyway, here we go. We have a female pelvic massage. The modern day vibrator actually stems from a medical tool doctors used in the 19th century. Yay! Go doctors! Or maybe not. While I know many people around the world happily use vibrators today, back in the 19th century, they were used to cure a disease known as hysteria in women, also just known as normal human emotions. Hysteria was known to cause depression, depression, anxiety, irritability, sexual desire, insomnia, faintness, and even a bloated stomach. So what would these male 19th century doctors do? Well, they would perform a pelvic massage with one of these vibrators and would perform these over a series of treatments. Magically, the woman would feel better, but it was probably just because she had an orgasm. Anyway, eventually there was a device nicknamed the manipulator made by Dr. Joseph Mortimer Granville that was able to be brought home and used by the woman at home in the privacy of her own home, and she could use it herself, and she could do it whenever she pleased. So while orgasms are known to boost moods, let it be known that hysteria was just a woman who was emotional and not a real disease. I think men and women were just so sexually repressed back then that some doctors thought it might be a good idea and women believed it. Anyway, nowadays if you want to go ahead and use a manipulator by yourself, no matter what your sex, you do not need to do it in front of a doctor, and thank God for that. Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have bloodletting. For almost 2,000 years, losing blood was seen as a good, healthy, and normal thing for people to have done to their bodies. It was also one of the most popular procedures done by surgeons. It was based on a flawed scientific theory that stated humans possessed 4 humors, aka liquids. Those liquids being blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. In order to cure disease or restore balance to these liquids, doctors would suggest bloodletting by letting a patient bleed out a little bit and evenly let these fluids restore to equal levels. Sometimes they would even use leeches to suck out the blood from patients, which gives me just as many heebie-jeebies as giving blood already does to me. But this was used up until the 19th century, and it is also important to know that in 1838, Henry Clutterbuck, a lecturer at the Royal College of Physicians, stated that bloodletting is a remedy which, when judiciously employed, it is hardly possible to estimate too highly. Freaking yikes. Once again, time and time again, I am so incredibly thankful that I live in the time period that I do live in, and this is one of those moments. Coming in at our number 4 spot, we have lithotomies. What is a lithotomy? Well, it was a procedure that was once used in order to remove bladder stones. Ouch. But just wait, as if that didn't sound painful enough already, it was done by a patient lying on their back while a blade was passed into the bladder through the perineum, the soft bit of flesh that is between the sex organ and anus, and doctors would then use hands and sometimes other instruments to then remove the stones from the bladder, and it probably goes without saying here, but the procedure was quite painful. What is even more crazy is that it had a mortality rate of 50%. The number of these procedures began to decrease in the 19th century, and it was replaced with much more humane ways of extraction. Along with that, in the 20th century, healthier diets also made less and less cases of bladder stones, and such procedures were no longer as common as they once were. But yeah, thank God. This one is one that I would have just chosen to curl up and die, because I am such a big wimp when it comes to anything medical that I know I wouldn't be able to take it, which is why these next 3 become my worst nightmare. Starting us off in our top 3 at number 3 and rhyming with our number 4 spot, you guessed it, we have lobotomies. This is technically the number 1 spot for me because it sounds the worst in my opinion, but it rhymes, so I put it at number 3. But our number 1 is no picnic either, just so you know. Anyway, if you don't know what a lobotomy is, this is a procedure where doctors would sever connections in the brain's prefrontal lobe by inserting an ice pick into the patient's head. It was usually inserted close to the eye, and many patients were not even put to sleep for the procedure. I can't even talk about it. This one makes me so sick beyond belief. But anyway, a Portuguese neurologist invented the procedure back in 1935, and a year later, the procedure was used in the US thanks to Walter Freeman. Thanks, Walter. He would go around in his automobile and would perform these procedures around the country in quite horrific ways, and quite often was not precise in his execution either. Thankfully, this procedure was put to rest after advances in psychedelic drugs were made, and Freeman performed his last lobotomy in 1967. Nope, and no. Coming in at our number 2 spot, we have shocking arousals. During the 19th century, impotence in a man was believed to have stemmed from too much sex or masturbation, or even just the opposite, too little of it. So what was the cure for impotence? Well, electric shocks, of course. Surgeon Samuel W. Gross stated in his book that masturbation, gonorrhea, sexual excesses, and constant excitement of the genital organs without gratification would lead to impotence. So doctors would then shock them back to arousal. Some doctors would even put patients in bathtubs filled with electrodes, which apparently restored sexual desire in just as little as 6 sessions. Oh, only that many? That's not so bad, I guess. Not. By the late 1800s, there were even electropathic belts or electric belts that were used to help men from kidney pains, sciatic nerve issues, backaches, headaches, nervous exhaustion, and even impotence. While we know today that impotence is sparked by mental and physical illnesses, in some places it is still believed that low energy wave shock therapy can improve ED. I think that would have to be a last resort because that still sounds terrifying to me. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot is one almost as bad as a lobotomy. We have trepanation. Well, what is this? Well, this was a procedure that was done for centuries and is actually the oldest form of surgery that we know of. The procedure consisted of a human taking on the doctor role and scraping a hole in the skull of the human in the patient role. No one is quite 100% sure what the purpose of this procedure was, but most people believe it was for letting out demons that were believed to be inhabiting the patient's body. Quite surprisingly, many humans survived and healed from this barbaric procedure. Now, were they cured of their demons though? No one quite knows. While doctors no longer do this to cure demons, there are cases of a similar procedure being done to help relieve pressure and excess blood from the brain. There was a case in Australia where it was used, and if not for the ancient procedure, the patient would have passed away due to a blood clot on the brain.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Tobacco enemas. When somebody tells you you're blowing smoke, it means that you're lying, right? You're giving this exaggerated information. But back in the 17th and 18th centuries, they literally had to blow tobacco smoke at your behind. Weirdest work break ever. Okay, so why did we perform magician enemas back then? What's the deal? Tobacco smoke enemas were used to treat quite a few symptoms, even our common colds. They came in fancy kits with a pair of bellows and a rubber tube, and of course, there's a tube. We don't just stand around in a circle, casually blowing smoke at someone, being like, you feel better yet? Alright. There was a tube. It was a whole medical thing. It was done by medical practitioners. The idea was that tobacco smoke could warm up a soon-to-be dead body. The nicotine would also stimulate your adrenal glands, jolting you back to good health. By the time 1811 came around, they realized that these butt blunts were not a safe treatment. Number 9. Spin doctors. Remember when you were a kid and you would just spin around in a field with your friends and make yourself dizzy? It was all fun. Well, it's all fun and games until somebody passes out. But back in the mid-19th century, that was how medical experts would put you to sleep. More specifically, this is how they used to treat schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. There was a whirling chair and a whirling bed. A whirling bed. You ever lay down after a night out and you feel like your bed's spinning? Times that by 1,000. This is horrible. I laughed out loud writing this. They would spin these poor patients around literally as fast as they could until they blacked out, and the goal was literally to shuffle the contents of their brain around where they would come out sane or normal after. They're like, you feel better? No? Ah, he's asleep. We'll wait till he wakes up. Number 8, animal droppings. Got a sore throat? No sweat. Dog poop is gonna cure that easily. Animal droppings being used in history for medicinal practice will always be hilarious. But it checks out. Makes a lot more sense than spinning a guy around until he's asleep. I don't know. Ancient Egyptian doctors would use donkey, gazelle, fly, and dog droppings to ward off bad spirits, mainly. The demons would try and sneak up on you in the middle of the night and they're like, ugh, this place sucks. Let's go next door. What is that? Yuck. Microflora was often found in these droppings, so the consensus was that these properties could include antibiotic substances. In 1957, a microbiologist, Stanley Falco, began instructing folk to eat their own poo. Yeah, you heard me. Which we at Most Amazing Top 10 respectfully disagree. Gross, don't do that. Next, number 7. Abracadabra. The first time this word was written down was not Harry Potter. It was actually in the early 3rd century AD when the Roman emperor's physician mentioned it in his book of medicine. Patients were instructed to write the word abracadabra over and over, almost like Bart Simpson, only they would have to remove a letter each time they do it. So it's actually easier than what Bart had to do. Wow. And just like that, your malaria is now cured. No, there were other steps involved too. It's not that easy. You would have to bind the paper, then wrap it up in linen, and then wear it around your neck for 9 days, and then and only then can you discard the paper by throwing it over your shoulder into a river running east, not west, east, or else it'll just go that way. That talisman was supposed to protect its user from bad air, malaria pills, or spells. What's it gonna be, folks? 50-50. Number 6, ice baths. Today, if you saw somebody having an ice bath, you wouldn't really think anything of it. Maybe they just finished leg day and they're trying to reduce inflammation, improve breathing, all that good stuff. But back in the day, ice baths weren't just meant for athletes, they were meant for those who had, you guessed it, rabies. Rabies was of course a growing concern in Europe in the 1700s, so a treatment seen in the book of Physic, and the golden trick for rabies here was to take 40 grains of ground liverwort, add some pepper, mix it up in milk, and then drink it 4 times. That's like a fear factor challenge. That is disgusting. That is the worst thing I've heard. Liver milk and a nice bath. Happy Sunday, folks. Fear no more. Number 5, cornflakes. For this next point, we're gonna be taking a look at the early work of J.H. Kellogg. Like the cereal Kellogg, that is exactly who I'm talking about right now. Unlike Tony the Tiger, this Kellogg man was very real, and he was a medical doctor and health activist. Back in the 19th century, alone time also meant sin time, and that was a no-go for Mr. Kellogg. So he created cornflakes so that it would kill the urge to do the dirty. He even wrote down at one point, If illicit commerce of the sexes is a heinous sin, self-pollution is a crime doubly abominable. Okay, Kellogg's brother was on the right track of history here. He wanted to add sugar to his cereal, saying it would make people happier. But he insisted that bumming people out for breakfast was the best way to avoid these sins. Number 4. Tapeworms. Back in the Victorian times, they really figured out the trick to weight loss. Was it watching what you eat, counting your steps, maybe getting a gym membership? No, and nope. It was easier than all of those things, and you didn't even have to pull back on how much you were consuming. All you needed was a handy tapeworm. Yeah, tapeworm, right in there. You know those things that can kill you today if you get one? One of those. The plan was if you eat a tapeworm egg, it'll later hatch in your stomach, and then at that point you could just eat anything you wanted happily. Every time you ate, the tapeworm would also eat, so you could get your snack on while still rocking those skinny jeans. Tapeworm cyst pills or the Stairmaster? I still wouldn't do the Stairmaster, to be honest. That really does suck. Number 3, radium. Back in the 1930s, a man named Eden Byers, a 51-year-old man, started to feel some arm pain. This was normal because he at the time was a pro golfer and a steel manufacturer. He was advised to drink radioactive water to help this problem. Each bottle of this water contained radium and isothorium, and while he lost weight at first, his jaw ended up developing bone necrosis and it fell off. It's almost like radiation is bad for your body. Huh. Now, we didn't know this back then, of course, so we had tons of radium-based products, not just the water. Thoradia was a beauty company that made radioactive creams, lipsticks, powders, anything to bring out the shine in you. The Trico system as well was horrible. It was this big desk in the 1920s salons. It was a massive x-ray that would magically remove your hairs for just 20 treatments. Easy breezy. 10 years later, these beauties would develop ulcers, carcinoma, keratosis, and sadly some wouldn't survive its lasting effects of radiation. Vita radium suppositories were hot in the 30s. It was marketed for people who were down in the dumps, people who have lost their charm. Instead of feeling better by exercising and eating well, they would put radium in their bodies. The old tobacco smoke way of fixing your problems, you know? In your butt. Just put it in your butt, you'll feel better. Number 2. Rotting whale body. One of the most strange things on display in the Australian National Maritime Museum exhibit has got to be the whale carcass treatment. The cure for rheumatism back in the 19th century was to crawl inside of a dead whale carcass and just hang out for a bit. Just talk to your friends for a bit, and by a bit I mean 30 hours. A full 30 hours you have to sleep inside of a whale. After that point, you would be healed for at least 12 months. What a deal. It began in the town of Eden, obviously a whaling town on the southern coast of Australia. Only the user's head would be poking out of the whale too. I forgot to mention that. It's like the world's worst sleeping bag. It all started when an intoxicated man stumbled into a dead whale body, passed out, and then when he woke up, his rheumatism was cured. From pale ales to pale whales. No more achy joints for you, my friend. Sweet dreams. And finally, number 1, bird beaks. They say if you're out with friends to have a glass of water after every alcoholic beverage. That way you can skip the hangover, your body's getting hydrated, and you can also keep the party going all night long without embarrassing yourself or feeling sick. Now, back in ancient Assyria, they would beak and rally. Bird beaks were ground up as best as they could be at the time, and then they would mix it with Commiphora tree sap called myrrh, and then they would consume it. Now, that sap, myrrh, would normally be used for perfumes. That's how strong it was in its raw form. Honestly, I think I would rather just be hungover. Am I crazy? There's no way I'm crushing up beaks. I can barely operate a blender after a night out. I'll just stick with the Gatorades for now. Thanks. Kicking off the list at number 10, flowers. Back in the Middle Ages, carrying flowers around town didn't mean that you had a hot date. It was their version of wearing a mask during the plague. A little more stylish than our masks that we have today, the N95. It's a bit more pretty than that. Today we use flowers for ceremonies. They're beautiful, they're symbolic, but back then we would carry flowers with us to keep us safe. And also because there was zero sanitation and everything smelled like Guys would have flowers tucked into their lapels, so if people were dumping buckets of feces on the street, which is what they did when they were full, ew, gross, you would just smell your flower and then quickly scurry off. The children's song, Ring Around the Rosie, refers to the rash caused by that plague, so you would have to carry a pocket full of posies. Horrible odors were thought to carry disease, which makes my next point sound even funnier. Number 9, jar of farts. Not the Christina Perri song, that's Jar of Hearts. Jar of Farts, during the time of the Black Death, back in the 1600s, health experts believed that bodily gas could fight exposure from the plague. I'm really glad we don't do this during our pandemic now. I feel like this method is safely behind us, so we can talk a little smack about it. Many kept goats inside their homes because they wanted it to smell awful inside. If you didn't have a goat to stink up the place, you would have to go and get jars of farts. I don't know why I'm doing that. Close it. Whenever the pestilence would appear in town, all you had to do was take the lid off and take a sniff. Kind of like a Yankee candle when you open it and you're like, fresh laundry. Also, I have so many questions. Who's filling these jars? How fast do you have to close the lid after you're done? Are you like, all right, we're good. That's enough for today. Put that back for tomorrow. It's gonna go foul. It's gonna get rotten. So gross. Number 8, blood and bones. These are so horrible. Bone marrow soup is pretty common today. Animals drink it, they get stronger, their hair is shinier, all that jazz. But ancient Romans did it in their own horrible way for reasons. See, they used to ingest blood from fallen soldiers in order to prevent seizures. Yeah, if you suffered from epilepsy, you had to double down as a vampire back in the day. 12th century doctors used ground up bones, something they called mummy powder, which I gotta say, lazy name. They could have put more time into that name. But they would do this because they believed the spirit would pass through into the person ingesting it. Like, that's crazy. First thing my spirit would say is like, hey man, why did you eat my bones? Can you not do that anymore? Stop grave robbing us. Thanks. 17th century England, if you were sick, you would go to these gatherings in hopes of getting fresh blood from the deceased. People go to baseball games with mitts. They're like, oh, I hope I catch a ball. Some guy's like, oh, I hope I catch a spleen. Number 7, St. Fiacre's Rock. For this next one, we're going all the way back to the 7th century to an Irish monk named St. Fiacre who had the misfortune of dealing with hemorrhoids. That was until one day he sat on a hard rock and just like that, boom, no more disease. Was it just timing perhaps, or was this indeed a magical rock? Well, medieval doctors voted the latter. A good amount of them, an unhealthy amount rather, would send patients to this rock as a cure. Imagine going to your doctor for a headache and he's like, yeah, just go sit over there for a little bit. Yeah, just go think about what you've done for a hot minute, maybe it'll help. This sounds insane, but in reality, you wanted to hear this because other treatments for the disease included shoving a red hot iron pipe right where the sun does not shine. You know where the sun does shine though? St. Fiacre's Rock. Go have a sit, enjoy. Number 6, French tonic wine. Fortifies and refreshes the body and brain. Sounds perfect. What's the secret? Well, back in 1863, a French chemist by the name of Angelo Mariani patented this healing tonic, which was red wine and cocoa leaves. Gross. Some would say the perfect combo. Now, he didn't get actual medical support like at all, but back then he did have tons of celebrity appeal. Sarah Bernhardt, she's like, oh, my health and vitality I owe to Vin Mariani. When at times unable to proceed, a few drops give me a new life. They call Vin Mariani the king of all tonic wines. Another ad shows Pope Leo, his holiness. He gave Mariani a gold medal in recognition of this jazzy juice. Imagine the Pope being like, here's a gold medal. That's how good your Dyson vacuum is. Enjoy. They don't do that. It's not a thing. Stop. Stop lying. Hashtag fake news. Number 5, larval therapy. If you're watching this video right now, maybe you're snacking out, eating some noodles, I'll give you a minute. Stop eating. The medical use of maggots, also referred to as biosurgery, biotherapy, or the worst thing I've ever heard, was around in the early days, and even today we still do this, I hate to admit, yeah. Physicians have used maggots to clean those wounds instead of, you know, polysporin. There is a method behind the madness though, and it does check out. It's just really disgusting. Since maggots only feed on dead flesh, doctors figured there's no need to worry about them eating healthy tissue, so they just eat all the bad stuff. Imagine you scrape your knee falling off your bike and your doctor gives you a bag of maggots. If you're feeling sick like I am talking about this right now, just remember that in 2019 in the archives of dermatology, it showed maggots being placed on surgical incisions, and that cleared more dead tissue than scalpels or scissors, so it works. What is your doctor, Oogie Boogie from Nightmare Before Christmas? I'm done with this point. I feel sick, you feel sick. Let's move on. Next. Number 4, ants. Ants, okay. Some of the greatest little builders of all time. Turns out they make for great healers as well. Nearly 12,000 years ago, ants were used to keep those wounds closed. What they would do is grab these ants called army ants or majors, and they would grab their ant heads right at the back, and then as a result, that ant will open its mandibles really wide. And then you would attach the ant's face to your open wound, medical wound, and then it would squeeze shut like a stapler. Only the horrible part of this process is that in order for the ant to continue to hang on and then, you know, hang on as a stitch would, its head needed to be removed from its body. A single wound can have numerous ant heads, like buttons on a sweater. Here's a nice image to go in your head. Ant heads, but make it cozy this winter. That's so funny. It's like, ow. And then you just have an ant head on your neck. You're like, yeah, I fell. Number 3, vomiting. Mental illness, you say? Just throw up for a bit and just see how you feel. Back in the day, ancient Greek physician Claudius Galen came to the conclusion that many or most illnesses came from substances in your body. Like if you're dizzy and you feel kind of sick, hey, odds are you're probably drunk, you had too much wine. It checks out in some cases. But in the 1600s, Thomas Willis, an English physician, took this idea and then ran really far with it. He believed this was the case for mental disorders as well. So in order to cure a mental illness, he would suggest purging. Clinical depression, or humors as Willis would call it, was a quick fix. All you had to do was throw up. In part 1, we mentioned drilling holes in the skull in order to release evil spirits that are causing a person to act differently, but this sounds almost just as crazy. That's not a solution. Leave that in the past. Number 2, mercury. Any liquid inside your phone you just shouldn't rub on your face. That's obviously. Mercury is a chemical element. It's referred to as quicksilver, but no, it will not give you super speed. Back in the day, ancient Greeks and Persians used to use mercury as an ointment. Going all the way back to the Renaissance, mercury was used for treating STDs. Now, sometimes it would work. That's the thing that makes it confusing in history. The metallic properties would kill the infection, sure, but at the same time, you'll get extremely ill from mercury poisoning. Alchemists from the 2nd century thought that mercury made your life extended, like you would just become immortal almost, with some accounts claiming that the user gets the ability to walk on water. That's a pretty insane side effect, only of course it didn't work. Weird. You didn't turn into Jesus after drinking mercury, you didn't live longer, you just poisoned yourself. And finally, number 1, teeth whitener. Nowadays you can whiten your smile overnight, but back in the day, Romans would use urine to do the trick. Also, it wasn't their own urine. I feel like that matters. It makes it millions times worse. King Henry VIII's surgeon believed that all battle wounds should be washed with urine. Also, it's not like a jellyfish where it stings your foot and you go behind a bush and you're like, and then you return to normal. No, we're talking like large amounts of the not so mellow yellow. Later on in history, this number 1 treatment was used to treat sores caused by the bubonic plague. Now we see all these survival shows today where they talk about drinking your own pee in order to survive. Like what's that guy, Coyote, what's his name, Dave Grohl? No, not Dave Grohl. What is it? Bear Grylls? Yeah, Bear Grylls is like, right, drink your own urine behind this and you'll be good. It's like, no, don't ever do this. Like if you're in the wild or whatever, never do this. This is false information. This will dehydrate you and also taste pretty bad. George Thomas, London physician back in 1666, suggested using urine for burns, bites, and sore throats. I would much rather have a sore throat than to drink urine. Also back then, if you had sciatica, well, urine for a treat. It would be a really gross liquid diet. You don't want to do anything. I'd rather have sciatica. I'd be sore all the time.